Welcome to Leadership in the Line of Fire with your host, Brad Hauck. Join Brad as he dives into the heat of leadership challenges, where the flames of business uncertainty meet the hard-earned lessons of firefighting. Embrace change, master agility, and become the trusted leader guiding your team through the smoke. Get ready to ignite your leadership journey.
What separates a great leader from everyone else? It's not confidence, charisma, or having all the answers. It often comes down to the decisions they're willing to make when there's no obvious right choice. In this episode, I'll look at 5 leadership decisions that get rarely discussed, but often decide whether a team stays strong, loses trust, or heads in the wrong direction. Some of them may challenge you in a way that make your thinking about leadership change. By the way, if these leadership lessons are making you think differently, you'll find much more in my book, Run Towards the Flames. It's packed with real fireground experience, hard-earned leadership lessons, and practical strategies you can use when the pressure is on. Grab your copy at Amazon.com and take the next step to becoming a leader your team can rely on. Number 1, decide when to stop before you start. Great leaders set clear trigger points before committing to a plan. They know what conditions will make them continue, change direction, or pause, or, of course, withdraw and quit. You need to put triggers in place when you're making your decisions because they give you points to check along the way as a task proceeds. And often you need to put them on a timeline as well. So I know on the fireground, when we're planning a day out of how we're going to attack a fire, we also put trigger points up on our timeline on the board. And we have a large whiteboard where we break it up into hours roughly, and then we put in all our meetings and we put in all our trigger points. So, you know, that the team has reached this point by this time. And if they haven't, we need to know because we may need to change our plans for later on that day for night shift or for the next day. But we've got to have those trigger points in place early so that when we hit them, we know what we're going to do. And one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that they go into a fire or into a business problem and they don't have any trigger points or any ideas when something's going to finish. Now, you can apply this in business really easily. If you're working on a problem, set up a timeline. Now, it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month. It's up to you. But on that, have times for meetings when you're going to get back together or meetings with specific teams. And that allows you to upfront prepare for those times. Also, you can set alarms to remind yourself you've got to be there. Secondly, you need to look at whether you can put trigger points in there so that when you get to those meetings, you find out that we've hit those goals or we've hit those points, and now we're moving into the next stage. Along the way, when you're working those out, you need to work out how much is enough. In other words, what do they need to achieve by that time, or what do you need to achieve by that time? Of course, more importantly than anything else, you need to set a goal. What is the goal that you're trying to achieve? If you don't know what the end outcome is, you don't know what your trigger points and your achievement levels are as you move through the project. Little things like when you need to hand over, it's important to have these plans in place because you can't be there 24/7. And sometimes you're going to hand over to someone else to take on the rest of the day, the night shift, or you might be going away for a couple of weeks. So by preparing this stuff and making sure your team works to a timeline, everybody knows what's going on and everybody can easily work with it. I know in project management, people use timelines consistently. And there's a reason for that because everybody can see where they're supposed to be and what's supposed to have achieved by what time. In many other walks of life, we don't use them, so they're unusual to us. But it doesn't mean you can't apply this. Sometimes trigger points are not points to stop, but they could be points to pivot. In other words, we need to have this done by this time, but if that's not completed, then we actually need to pivot. We need to do something different. If we don't do something different, we're not going to achieve our goal. So you might have a team of 5 working on that project. They get to a certain trigger point and they're nowhere near finished. Well, maybe you need a team of 20. You need to bring more people in, whatever it is. That's the importance of deciding your trigger points and knowing when to stop as you move through towards your goal. As always, that famous saying, begin with the end in mind. It's so important. You've got to know when you're going to stop before you start, and you've got to know what that looks like, when or where or what it is, so that your whole team can focus. So are you continuing because the plan still works or because stopping would hurt your pride? Really important to think carefully. Number 2, decide who is allowed to challenge you. Power can make people afraid to speak honestly. Great leaders deliberately give trusted people permission to question their decisions and to point out what they may have missed. Everybody can ask questions when you're explaining things, but not everybody has the right to question decisions. And that comes down to a whole pile of different factors. For example, experience. Someone who arrived yesterday, who's not worked in the industry, has no experience. Now, they have the right to ask questions to learn the answers that they need, but not necessarily question you. Someone with experience has an educated question for you. They know from experience what happened. They know what's going on or has happened in the past, and they bring a level of knowledge to the question that is far above someone who's just arrived. As I said, there's always a place for questions, but maybe they need to be moved to the end of the conversation in the general questions area rather than interrupting as you go along. You should only let certain people have the right to interrupt you early, and those are your top people that you trust implicitly. There's a chain of command in business and on a fire for a reason. You have your trusted advisors, you have your high-level team. So for example, on the fire ground, I might be operations officer. I've got my sector commanders, and then they have their crew leaders. And we work down through that framework. That's there for a reason. The sector commanders are asking big questions. They know what's going to go on below them. They know what the crew leaders are going to ask because they've been a crew leader. So therefore, all that experience comes to the fore, and they're able to ask good questions. So they can challenge you on your decisions. It doesn't mean that they're having a go at you. More often than not, they're just making sure that you've covered everything in your head because they're backing you up. They're your team. They're the people that are going to help you implement your plan. So don't be surprised and don't be worried when people do ask questions when they fall into that trusted group. Don't ignore dumb questions from other people. I mean, they're important. There is a reason that person asked that question. But if you're using your chain of command really well, you shouldn't be in front of the smaller teams that you're working with. You should be working with your higher level leaders, and they should be working down. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you're working in a small team and you need to answer those questions, but push them back a little bit, get through your briefing, get through your explanations and all those sorts of things before you go into those smaller questions. You don't need to be rude. Just be honest and say, I'll come back to that question later on. I just want to get through the main part of my briefing or my discussion or whatever it is you're actually working on. Number 3, decide what you're willing to let fail. This is a tough one. Okay, you cannot protect everything during a crisis. Great leaders identify what matters most and allow less important work to slow down, change, or stop. There are things out of your control. There always will be. Triaging, as it's commonly known, is really hard. In mass casualty events, you'll see doctors and paramedics triaging people. They go around, they go, okay, you've got a cut, you go over there, you're having a heart attack, you're number 1, you're bleeding but not profusely, so we need to deal with you but not right straight away, put pressure on that, and so on and so forth as they work their way through all of the patients. Because, like any event, there are things that have to be dealt with straight away. And it's a hard call. Sometimes some people are beyond help. But luckily, I don't work in that field and I don't necessarily have to make those calls. You might. And I know that if you do, you will have been trained in triaging because it is so important. We do the same thing in our businesses. We talk about ABC clients and ABC things we need to do. A's being the highest, B's being important, and C's being not so important. That's triaging in the true sense of the word. The C's can fail but you wouldn't like them to. You want to pick them up later. And by putting them in a category, at least they're listed there for you to get to. But the A's absolutely cannot. They must be followed up. Not everyone will understand why you've put certain things above other things, but you can explain it to them, or you can just say, this is our main goal and we must protect this at all costs. And that's it. When you're working your way through a plan, as I said, not everything is actually equally important. And so by breaking them up into A's, B's, and C's, or threatened assets we must protect at any cost, it allows people to, in their own minds, go, okay, I've got to make a choice. Something's happened. Do I go here or do I go here? And because they have an order of importance, they can make that decision because they're already aware of those things. You can take a loss for a win as long as it doesn't compromise safety and lives. In other words, some things you will lose. You can't win every single battle, especially on a fire. You'll win most of them, but some things will happen beyond your control. But in the end, the goal is to contain the fire and put the fire out and protect lives and property. So if you can do that, and you might lose a doghouse or a chicken coop or something, that's a win in my books. The key is understanding that nothing comes before human life. And I mean, it's not so serious in business, but it can be, depending on safety and other considerations that we need to take into account when we're making decisions. We had a fire a few years ago where we were defending an estate, a large fire coming in, we're doing house protection, but we were told before we entered that there were some houses that could not be protected, and that in the event that the fire hit those houses, we were to pull back and not try and defend them because of where the houses were built. They were indefendable. Now, that's a big call by someone, luckily, well above my pay grade. And it was true. In the end, we did lose some houses there. But the way that it happened meant that we had to deal with that. It was considered not a loss of human life, that they were indefensible, and that we couldn't put the firefighters' lives at risk. So be it, really tough to make those calls. But sometimes that's just the way things are. What are you trying to save that is putting a whole mission at risk? Number 4, decide how much uncertainty to reveal. This is a big one. People don't like revealing the fact that they don't know what's going on. Great leaders don't pretend to know everything. They explain what they know, what remains uncertain, what happens next, and when the situation will be reviewed. There's being vulnerable and honest, and then there's being weak. You need to know the difference. Yes, you need to explain. We know this. We don't know what's going to happen here. This is what could happen, and we're going to look at that when we get more information down the track. That's okay to tell people those things. They need to know that we're certain about this and we're uncertain about that. It's not about saying, well, I think this and I don't know and I'm unsure, okay? That's weakness. Be honest, be clear and firm. And if necessary, just make a list of things so that you can read them off. If you're uncertain about things, it's better to write things down. Then as you go through explaining to people what's happening, you can make it much cleaner and clearer for people. An educated decision is better than no decision at all. I've said this many times in the podcast before. Make your decisions, base them on your experience and your team's experience, but make a decision. It's really important. It removes uncertainty. People are looking to you for leadership, and that's really important. You never know when things are going to change. For example, we were at a fire. We were sent out to protect one side of a road from fire on the other side. At that time, conditions were great. Theoretically, the fire was going to burn up to the edge of the road and stop. It was all good. And everything was going fine. Then suddenly the wind picked up. The flames jumped up to the tops of the trees, and we were having embers rain all around us. Fire went over the road and kept going. At first, everything was fine. But the uncertainty of the situation changed everything. We can never be certain about weather when we're dealing with fire. So you need to understand that you can let people know this is what we think will happen, but who knows? Are you creating confidence or simply performing certainty? Now that's really important, performing. Sometimes people talk about that guy's got a lot of face, meaning that you can say a lie and people think it's true. That's not what we want here. As a leader, you cannot perform certainty. You need to create confidence within the bounds of the information and the task that you're trying to complete. Number 5, decide what kind of win you will refuse. A result is not a real success if it damages people, ignores safety, or rewards poor behavior. Great leaders judge how the result was achieved, not only the final numbers. Ethics are very important when you're a leader, okay? You need to have lines that you will not trust. Safety, super important. Your people deserve to come with you and know they're going to return home to their families. Human life, of course, is beyond comprehension. We must protect it at all costs because we're all humans. And remember that some situations are unrecoverable. No matter what you do, you cannot fix them. And you have to be able to draw a line underneath them and accept that fact. Sometimes that can be quite devastating, and it's just the way it is. So be prepared for those things. Remember, pride goes before a fall. Don't let it get in the way of the right decision. I've seen people who refuse to make the right decision because they think people are going to point the finger at them. They're going to point the finger at you anyway. You're the leader. Doesn't matter whether you do the right thing or the wrong thing, people still point fingers. You'll learn that very quickly, as I have. But the point is that if you let your pride get in the road, it can lead to disaster, okay? Better to make the call and say, no, this is not working. I stuffed up. Let's get out of here, than to put people in danger or to have everything collapse around you, okay? As a leader, remember, people are looking to you for leadership. Also, that includes making the right call when things don't go right. One of my guilty pleasures is Chinese dramas. And often one of the things we see is pride coming through, where people do something wrong and they will not admit it. And one of the key elements is kneeling before someone in these dramas. And that's seen as really admitting defeat. And you'll see so many times where someone will refuse to kneel and the other person will take action against them and destroy their company. And look, that's part of the formula of the story. But the point is, the reason they won't kneel is because of their pride. If they just knelt, they probably would have saved their company, but because they were too prideful, because they didn't believe that the other person was stronger, bigger, faster, more powerful than them, that they were destroyed. So one of the things I love about the Chinese dramas is these lessons that come through all of their stories, one of which is definitely pride goes before a fall. Sometimes in life, it's not about putting out the fire, but letting it burn and containing it. Okay? You can't always hit the wins you want, but there's also wins that are unacceptable. Okay? Some fires are so big or so inaccessible, you must just let them burn until such time as you contain them. We're not going to go and put ourselves in danger to contain that fire when it's not going to actually help us win. So that's a win, for example, that I would not accept. Okay, I'm not going to put my people in danger just to contain a fire. So ask yourself, what harmful behavior are you accepting because it produces good results? You can't have people doing stupid things. Great leaders are not separated by how many decisions they make. They're separated by the difficult decisions they're willing to make before pressure, pride, and fear take control. Great leadership is tested when every option carries a cost. You may need to stop a plan, listen to a challenger, let something fail, admit uncertainty, or refuse a win that compromises what really matters. The real question is this: when pressure, fear, and pride enter the decision, will you still have the courage to make the right call? Great leaders aren't separated by how many decisions they make. They're separated by the difficult decisions they're willing to take before pressure takes control. Choose one decision from today's episode and apply it to something you're facing now. Set your limits, protect what matters, and be ready to change direction when you hit those trigger points. Thanks for listening to Leadership in the Line of Fire. Until next time, stay calm, make the hard calls, and run towards the flames.
Thank you for tuning in to Leadership in the Line of Fire. If today's episode sparked some insights, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your support fuels this journey. Join us next time as we continue to explore leadership lessons from the fire line. Until then, keep leading with courage and agility.